In this exercise, we're going to see how black and white fares when compared with Channel Mixer, because conventional wisdom has it that Channel Mixer is the old school way to do things, and that the black and white function, which came around about a decade later, is the better way to do things. And that's not actually necessarily the case. The two are just two very different approaches to mixing black and white images. So I'm back inside this familiar image from Scott Graysold. This time it's called gothicmixes.psd, and this represents the last version of the image we saw with that shadow highlights layer in place there. I'm going to go ahead and turn off our existing modification so that we restore the full color version of the image. And then I'm going to press my keyboard shortcut, so you can press it if you got it as well, Control-Shift-B, in order to not only bring up the adjustments panel, but also ignore the fact that a brightness contrast layer is selected, so we don't have to click on this left pointing arrowhead, and automatically take us to a black and white function. So we're generating a new black and white layer, and we can name it at the same time. So it's performing 3 or 4 steps in one for us. I'm going to go ahead and call this B&W and click OK, and we've now got a new black and white layer. And so far, we're just seeing the default settings. It looks a little drab. So let's try the target adjustment tool and see where we get here. This time, we might have a little bit more luck because we do have a wider range of colors to work with. I'm going to start by dragging inside of the young woman's face here up front, and that allows me to modify reds, as you can see in the upper right-hand corner of the screen. And let's see, if I drag inside the shadows of her eyes, I might be able to get yellows, but I should be able to because they're definitely rampant in this area. But regardless of where I'm dragging in the eyes, I'm still getting reds. So I guess I'm going to have to adjust the yellows value manually. Then let's see, if I drag inside of this other woman's lapel, I believe I get blues. Yes, indeed I do. And I'll go ahead and raise that blues value to about 50. Works pretty well for this image. And finally, I've got this little earring detail right there. And this little bit of plastic ends up being identified as cyan there inside the adjustments panel. So I'm going to take the cyans. In order to brighten that earring, I'm going to take it up to 100. And of course, I could go farther than that if I wanted to. I could make that earring very bright indeed, but I think that's too much. All right, so reduce that to 100 once again. Let's check out these yellows. They are all over the place. Notice that I just was not able to target them with that target adjustment tool. So I'm going to take this yellows value to 130 right there. Not much in the way of greens going on. If you take a very close look down here in the bottom middle region of the image, you'll see that it's brightening when I tweak the heck out of the greens when I take them up to 300, and it's darkening a little bit when I take that value down to negative 200, which is the minimum setting. I'm just going to go ahead and match the yellows at 130 there. I already set cyans, I already set blues. Let's drop down to magentas. Now, magentas is something that I have to admit, black and white has the advantage over Channel Mixer where this specific modification is concerned, because notice that I can identify the hair, basically, the rear woman's hair really lights up with these magentas. So I could make her hair light indeed if I wanted to, as if it's neon or something. And this is fairly analogous to what I was demonstrating with relative parametric versus perceptual. Where relative parametric is concerned, I could super saturate that hair, but it would come at the expense of the edges. So I would have all sorts of aberrant edges going on. Whereas with perceptual, I'm going to dim down that hair, but I'm also going to have better edge transitions. Anyway, I'm going to take down where magentas is concerned. I'm going to take that value down to 70. And then let's go ahead and settle the reds down a little bit as well. I'm going to go ahead and take that value down to about 60, just for the sake of following along with me. And we end up getting this effect here. Now, we're pretty close to having the effect I'm looking for, but the more time I spend inside this image, I'm not really liking what Shadows Highlights has done to this forward woman's eye. It looks a little bruised. So I'm going to apply a layer mask in order to reveal the original version of the eye just a little bit. So I'll double click to the right of the word masks right there in order to collapse the adjustments panel. Then I'll switch to the Shadows Highlights layer, the S/H layer. And let's go ahead and add a layer mask by clicking on the Add Layer Mask icon. And then I'll press the B key in order to get my brush tool. And if I right-click, you can see that I have a very large, soft brush going. And that may be a little large for our purposes, but it might work out pretty well too. I'll just hide that panel by pressing the escape key. And I'll paint with black. This is very important, by the way. By default, I don't think you're going to see black as your foreground color. So make sure black is showing up there as foreground. If not, go ahead and switch them by clicking on the switch icon or pressing the X key. And then paint that eye away like so. You don't have to be all that careful. You can paint it to the hair a little bit if you want to. And then I'm really not going to be careful with this woman in the background here. Not because she doesn't deserve care, just because she doesn't need it. I'm just going to paint inside of her face in order to brighten her up a little bit. And now we have two blobs here inside this layer mask thumbnail. Now, I think this is too much contrast now between the shadows highlights version of the image and that original version. So first of all, I'm going to press the M key to switch back to the rectangular marquee tool so I don't accidentally paint inside the mask. And then I'm going to bring up the masks panel by clicking on the masks tab, and I'm going to reduce that density value. So if I take the density value all the way down to 0, of course, I'm once again revealing the shadows highlights version of the eye. So I'm making the layer mask entirely white at this point, getting rid of my modifications temporarily, of course. Whereas if I go ahead and split the difference somehow, I'm going to take it actually to 70. Works out pretty well for this effect. And we get a very nice black and white mix going. Now, the question becomes, how does this compare with our final channel mixer adjustment? And we'll evaluate that in the next exercise.